Welcome to another IEA Reporter podcast. I'm Dave Harbison, the Communications Director of the Idaho Education Association. Our guest today is longtime IEA member and current Idaho State Senator from District 18, Janie Ward-Engelking. She's also a member of the new K-12 task force, Our Kids, Idaho's Future. Senator, let's talk about your background as an educator first. You spent a long time in the classroom. Tell us where you taught, and what you learned from it.
Well, I would say that I grew up with four brothers on a farm along the Snake River in Marsing, so in rural Idaho for sure. And both my parents were teachers. And when I went to college, I had thought that I would be a nurse, but I ended up working in the migrant program one summer and absolutely fell in love with those children and realized that was my true passion. So after that, I taught junior high and sixth grade for 33 years. Absolutely loved it. And, I actually retired because I had a granddaughter that was ill and needed my help. But then the Luna laws happened, and I soon realized that we needed more educators in the legislature, because if legislators thought a computer could replace a teacher, then obviously they didn't understand what we did in the classroom. So at that point, I decided to run for office. And so, and I have to say that a lot of what happens in your classroom, a lot of what you do in your classroom is very applicable to the legislature.
And while we're talking about that aspect of your life and career, and I guess it deals with both, how did the IEA help and support you during your career as a teacher, and what do you see the IEA's role in the political process?
Well, I was a longtime member and still am of the IEA, and I got involved in the political action wing. I'd always been involved in politics. My family was very politically involved, but I soon realized that almost everything that happens in the classroom starts at the legislature. The funding, class size, just curriculum, so much of what we decide as legislators impacts our classroom. And I realized that they needed more educators in the legislature. There's too few. There's too few of us who can champion teachers' views and children's views.
With that in mind, do you feel like an underdog at times, having to fight that battle so hard for public education and for your colleagues who remain in the classrooms in various locations around the state?
Well, I grew up with four brothers, only girl, so I had a lot of experience being, in the minority. But the reality is most of our legislators care deeply about education. They just don't understand exactly what needs to happen. And so we need to do a better job of educating them and making sure that they know what teachers do in the classroom, how hard they work, how competent they are, and how desperate we are to keep our highly skilled teachers. So that is a challenge, but it's one that I love taking on because it's so important to our children and the future of Idaho.
In particular, it seems like teachers and educators are scapegoats or get the finger pointed at them for things that are well beyond their control.
Absolutely. They love to blame us for everything that happens in society, but the reality is most teachers I know are there because they absolutely love those children, and they work diligently every day, and they work way past the 60 or 70 hours that people know they work every week. And so it's a work of love, but it also has to be valued because we're just not seeing people go into education. You can only beat people down so much, and then pretty soon people are going to go, well, maybe I'll do something else. Maybe I won't be a teacher, even though they love that.
So let's transition then into your work with the K-12 task force convened by Governor Little. And one of the subcommittees is a teacher retention recruitment subcommittee as well. But in the bigger picture, since you're on the main task force, how would you characterize the work done thus far and your hopes and expectations for the outputs from that task force?
Well, I'm really encouraged. Everybody that I've worked with on that task force cares deeply about education, and there's a very diverse group: business people, parents, charter schools, traditional schools, and I'm currently very invested in the secure and safe schools, making sure we have secure and safe schools. Also the teacher pipeline, because we know the original task force, which Governor Otter convened, I sat on that task force, and we didn't really implement all the recommendations that were presented to the legislature. One of them deals with retaining highly skilled teachers. We didn't do the $60,000 state reimbursement for those people that we had hoped to do. And I think that hopefully that's going to be one of the recommendations that comes forward. I also believe we have to do something with facilities, and I think probably an interim committee is going to be put together to study that issue, because it's bigger than probably something we can do in a few months. But the reality is right now, charter school students receive $426 from the state for facilities. Traditional public school students receive $151. And that isn't equitable. We are incentivizing, people to start up charter schools because they get more money for facilities than our traditional schools do. And people say, well, yeah, but you can pass a bond. But the reality in rural Idaho is we can't pass a bond.
Yeah, let's pick up on that, because I'm curious as to how much discussion there's been throughout the task force about inequity in resources from district to district, and this idea of haves and have-nots, and the districts that can and do pass levies and those that either struggle to pass them or just flat out can't pass them.
And that's a real serious problem, because the state is mandated to provide a thorough and common, equitable education system. And we know that the districts have to pass levies just to keep the doors open, and that's not right. And we have a lot of school districts in the state that are operating on 4-day weeks. They didn't go to that because they thought it was the best possible plan. They went to it because they didn't have the resources to keep the doors open 5 days a week, and that's not right. These levies, there's nothing supplemental about them. They're not to add some neat program, which is what originally that was set up to do. They're just to keep the doors open. And so we have to do a better job of sending more money from the state to our local school districts, and also more discretionary funds so that their hands aren't tied.
Do you get a sense that there's traction for that within the task force and potentially within the legislature?
Yeah, I was really pleased to hear one of the business people speaking and said, in reality, even though it looks like we've given a 6% raise to education the last 4 years, in reality, if you take that over from 2009 to today and you look at that, it's really about a 1.5% increase when you look at the number of students and the additional costs that we've incurred because of cost of living, et cetera. So we are not funding our schools adequately, and that is a for sure. Now, unfortunately, we're looking at an economy that looks like it could turn to the downside, and that will be difficult to hold legislators' feet to the fire. But I think we have to continue with that, because workforce is a huge issue for our businesses in Idaho, and it really is about Idaho's future, and it's about our children.
Interesting you bring up the workforce development piece, because as you also noted, there are a number of business leaders and executives on that task force. And while workforce development may not be the be-all and end-all, it certainly is a strong component of the educational outputs. You're trying to build your workforce, and in addition to building solid citizens and people that can contribute in a variety of ways. How do we address that workforce development piece in the sense that we hear a lot about there are tons of jobs in Idaho that are going unfilled because the workforce isn't trained for them?
Yeah, and it's costing us millions of dollars here in Idaho. And, we have to take some of the blame for that as legislators, because we have not put the resources in those careers that businesses need. And we haven't done the research and development on a university level that was necessary. So we have to shoulder some of that blame. Having said that, I think we're making some strides forward to make sure that we're funding some of the careers that we know are needed by our businesses. But it's not easy, because some of those careers we don't even know what they are yet. So what we have to make sure is that we're giving our children the skills necessary to compete in a global economy, and that means collaboration and being able to think outside the box and creativity. And for so long, under No Child Left Behind, it was just the facts. Teach us just the facts, because that's what's on the test. And if you don't pass the test, then you don't get funding. So we took some steps backwards, and now we're trying to make up for that and move forward in a model that will work for a global economy.
How much of a push-pull is there within the legislature in looking at Idaho from the standpoint of historically it's a very agrarian economy and philosophy, and it's evolving from that, but not everybody necessarily is in favor of that evolution?
Well, we see that when we talk about early childhood learning. The data is there now. I mean, we have the brain research to show that birth to 3 years of age is critical. And if we're not doing the things we need to ensure that all parents and all child care programs and preschools have access to the best practices and that information, then we're letting some of our families down, because that's all new, that's brand new. And we can't catch these children up in a voluntary half-day kindergarten. If they come to kindergarten unprepared and they're 2 or 3 years behind, we can't catch them up in a half-day program. So the reality is we've got to put some resources, and it doesn't have to be mandated. We can put a repository together and where parents can go and find this information, and we can work with hospitals to make sure that parents know what is needed in that birth to 3 years. But it's going to take some investment, it's going to take some time, and it's time to do it.
And you've seen it as a professional educator in the classroom at the elementary level. You can tell which kids have had that solid foundation of pre-K and kindergarten and which have not.
Absolutely. And what some people don't realize is that when children come to school and they're not able to do what their peers do, it impacts their social, emotional well-being too. Then they get a feeling, well, I can't do it, or I'm not capable, and it spirals down, and it sets in play a misbehavior problem for them too in many cases. So we need to address this. It will pay big dividends for Idaho.
It sets up an interesting segue to an issue that we're hearing a lot about more and more from our members around mental health and student behaviors at all stages of the educational spectrum. I know it's been flagged by the task force as well. What kind of strategies or solutions do you think might be in the works there?
Well, we're working hard on that right now. First of all, in the making sure our schools are secure and safe. We know there's a mental health or an emotional well-being component to that. And unfortunately, when we had the downturn, when we had the recession, one of the first things that was cut was the counselor. So we need more counselors in the field. We need more social workers. We need more people that understand what the ACEs are, and to just what we should be looking for in children that have some issues. Maybe they're from a divorced family, they live in poverty. Those are all things that we need to look at and say, okay, this child has some things that we probably need to be following and addressing, and we need to provide more resources. And we haven't done that, but we're working toward it, and I'm hoping to see some good recommendations come out of the task force regarding that.
I know you're still very much in touch with a lot of your colleagues who remain in the classroom, and you certainly have your background, but how does teaching look different now than it did, I don't know, pick a number, X number of years ago when you were in the classroom? How does it look different?
Okay, that'd be about 10 years ago, and it's frightening, actually. And I have to say, when I left the classroom, I thought I really knew a lot about technology. And, I was one of the people that worked in my school building. I had the first smart board in Boise. So I thought I knew quite a bit about it. I would be so far behind the 8 ball in that component. It just changes so quickly. And teachers are being asked to do more every single day. And I don't know how they do it, because I felt like I was working 24/7 when I was a teacher, and I don't know how they're dealing with all the things. I mean, the school shootings, the kids coming to school afraid. I didn't have to deal with that, and now that's a common day occurrence almost. And so there's just so much more to it than people understand.
Just kind of wrap this up back to the legislative and political side of your current situation, and how optimistic are you that there's there has been progress made, and that we will continue on the right trajectory, so to speak, in terms of trying to improve public education in Idaho?
Well, I think there's a will. Now we've just got to find the way to do it. I think the task force recommendations, the Our Kids Idaho Futures task force recommendations, will be looked at seriously, but we have to really put a plan together to address those issues and those recommendations and actually move forward on them. We also have to look at the funding formula. It's antiquated, it's decades old, and the reality is we should not be funding children on an average daily attendance. It should be on enrollment. And that means we've been underfunding our schools about $60 million a year, because we do it on an average daily attendance, not on the number of students actually enrolled. And so we need to do something in that area. And that's a heavy price tag, but it's important, because when kids are absent, the costs don't go down. The teacher's still in the classroom, the lights are still on, the buses still run, meals are still served. So we have to do a better job in that area. So I'm hoping the funding formula, I'm hoping facilities, I'm hoping the Our Kids Idaho's Future Task Force recommendation move forward. That's my goal.
And for some folks, it's kind of a paradigm shift of you need to move past looking at it as a cost or an expense and view it as an investment. And it's an investment in our state's future.
It absolutely is. And we hear businesses say that every single day, and parents know that. We want our children and our grandchildren to stay in the state. We don't want them to be moving to surrounding states because the pay's better, or because opportunities are there, or because they can get a better education in that area, in a college or university there. We owe it to our children, our grandchildren, and the state to invest in education.
Senator, thank you for your career-long membership in the IEA and for all of your public service on behalf of public education in our state. And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thank you to all the teachers and educators and the people that keep our schools running. Thank you for all you do. It's amazing. And you do it not because of the money, but because you love children.